Hello folks, this is Leah Bonasage from MasterLab Systems. Today we'll be looking at building APIs with Spring Boot, with Java Spring Boot and GraphQL. Okay. So first of all, let's look at what is GraphQL. GraphQL is a query language for APIs, which is for application programming interfaces. GraphQL contains a single endpoint for all data fetching. It enables clients to specify exactly what they require and what they need, which is, lastly, it is also developed by Facebook, okay, which is now known as Meta. Okay, so let's look at GraphQL over REST. Of course, REST have got its own drawbacks of using it, for which are those who will be looking at them. So first, which is the first one, multiple endpoints. REST will require or will have multiple endpoints, of which imagine for a CRUD service that contains a create and a read and an update and a delete. You will have to define all of those endpoints in REST. However, in GraphQL, it's different. GraphQL only uses a single endpoint to do all those functionalities. Again, REST contains overfetching, does overfetching and underfetching sometimes, while GraphQL does precise queries and gives you the exact information that you require. Looking at REST again, REST contains a rigid structure, while GraphQL has a flexible and typed safe structure. REST is a strongly coupled to backend, while GraphQL is front-end driven. Yes, GraphQL is more of a front-end driven because of, instead of having all of these endpoints defined in your backend, you can simply just use one endpoint and query to that endpoint. Okay. Let's look at the benefits of using Java Spring Boot with GraphQL. Yes, GraphQL gives you that benefit of a type-safe queries, an automatic schema generation, integration with existing Spring stack, which is what we'll also be looking at, and perfect for microservices, which is also developer-friendly tools in GraphQL. Let's look at the tech stack we require for this demo or for this session for integrating Spring Boot and GraphQL. So we require Spring Boot 3+, which is equivalent and a version higher than 3 or a version from 3. Yes, Spring Boot, and we require a GraphQL, which is an official starter, and a GraphQL for Java, but we'll be looking at those, and a dependency management, which is either a GraphiQL or a Maven. Okay. Let's look at the project setup that will be required. So first of all, we need to add the GraphQL dependencies in our Maven POM file, of which we'll probably be looking at them at that as well. Okay, and then we'll add the custom GraphQL schema file, which will be mapped to our model, and we'll then add our queries, which is the query and a mutation. Again, GraphQL uses two different mechanisms or methodologies in when it is initiating its queries. First of all, for example, in a CRUD application that does a functionality of a create, a read, update, and a delete. So in GraphQL, normally, if you want to perform an operation such as a read, you use a query resolver. There's something called a query resolver, which we'll also be looking at that. We use a query resolver only if you are trying to read a data or you are trying to filter a data. However, if you want to use, for example, if you now want to create something new, a new resource from the server, or you want to delete an existing resource from the server, or update an existing resource from the server, you then use what? A mutation resolver, which is also, we'll be looking at that. So that's how GraphQL works. So you have a query resolver and a mutation resolver. Okay. So let's look at, for example, a GraphQL schema example. So for a book application that contains an ID, director, and an author, so you define it as a type book, which will also be mapped to our model, and then from there you define a query, which is now, for example, if you were to filter by an ID, that's how that query would look like in a GraphQL schema, which is book ID, and then you provide an ID and a book, which is mapped to your model. Okay. So let's look at the resolver now, which is now the book resolver. So this is basically now if you are trying to filter by an ID. So which is I said, it's a what? It's a query resolver. It's a query resolver, yes, not a mutation resolver, because you are trying to read from the server, not to update or create something new or to delete. You are trying to read something. So that's how it would look like if you were using in Spring to filter that. Okay. So now looking at the query, so when you are testing your queries with GraphQL, sometimes GraphQL does provide an interface whereby you could just simply run these queries. However, in this case, in Java Spring Boot, it becomes different how you set it up, because it doesn't directly or automatically provide you with an interface for running those queries, of which we'll be using Postman in this case to do our GraphQL queries. Okay, so again, let's not waste much time, folks. Before looking at the best practices and the use cases for using GraphQL, let's go ahead and create our own GraphQL project. Okay, so first step that we need is to go to your browser. Of course, if you are using Spring Initializer, or maybe you have an existing project that you want to use, and either your REST project that not Spring Initializer, either your REST project that you want to use, so you can simply just migrate your REST service to a GraphQL service, which is simple, something that we'll also be looking at. Okay, so again, let's define our project. So if you don't have an existing Java Spring Boot project, this is another quick way to spin it up. Or if you have an existing one, then you can just simply use it. Okay, so now, again, we pick Maven, we pick Java as the language, Spring Boot, fine 3.5.4, that's fine. From picking that, okay, and then you give it your name, of course. So from here, let's say MasterLab. Okay, so from demo, we give it a name, maybe Spring Boot GraphQL, or let's give it a proper name, for example, a catalog management. Since this is since we are building a book management, so I'm just gonna give it a catalog management name. That's the name. So again, we give it a description, a proper description, but that's fine. I'll keep it as is for now, but at your case you can give it a proper description rather than keeping it like that. Okay, again, so again, packaging, well, we'll leave it to here, and Java version, let's leave it to 17. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add the required dependencies. So if we look at that, yes, dev tool web, we do need web. From web, we require Lombok for scrapping and for scrapping the boilerplate Java code. So we require again dev tools. Yeah, probably essential to add dev tools, but again we require what, which is now GraphQL, which is very important, which is GraphQL. There it is. So once you have all of these, folks, you will simply just now generate your project, and then from generating it, automatically you import it from your IDE. So I have already done this process, so I was just showing you if you were to create a new project from scratch. So again, I will take you now to my IDE, whereby we will be building this GraphQL application. Okay, so once you do that, folks, you will simply generate it. Again, maybe let me add one thing. Since my application uses a database, that will, since we will also require a database, okay, so I'm using a H2DB, which is a lightweight database, which is that uses an in-memory, so it stores database, or when your project runs, that's how it stores your data. Immediately when your project has stopped running, it forgets the whole data. So that's how an in-memory database works. So we can just also add that in there. But again, if you have an existing project, you can still use it. You don't really have to add this. But if you are creating it from scratch, I'm just showing you how you would have to spin it up your Java Spring Boot project. So once you have that, you simply generate it. As you can see, catalog management.zip, and then you will import it to your IDE. Okay, so folks, let's go ahead to my IDE now, where I have this project already imported and set it up. Okay, so one thing first that we see in my IDE, it's an imported project that contains a MVC structure, and well, I would say it's already a working project, but we need to migrate it to a GraphQL compatibility. So again, first of all, what you would have to do, so if, for example, since now it is a REST-based service, for example, what you see here, it's a normal REST project. I will just quickly explain it, but the important case is how we are migrating this REST project to a GraphQL service. So, let's first start here defining our entity. So again, in normal Java application, this is how it was going to be like if you had used the imported one, the one you imported. All of this was not going to be there, which is all of this bit was not going to be there, which is controller, entity, repository, and service. All of that was not going to be in. So again, since I said this project already exists, but we're just going to be migrating it to a GraphQL service. So again, just to give you a brief of how it looks like, so we have a book model that is defined, that takes what, a long ID, an ID, a name, ISBN, published date, and a price, and a book type, so which is a enumeration of 3 types: hardcover, softcover, and an ebook. So that's our book type. So again, I'm just gonna do a quick test of this just to show you how it works using REST, and then before we do a migration to a GraphQL. Okay, so from here you have that model defined, well structured, and then you have your repository that interacts with your database and does your database queries to assist in doing database queries, which is that's your repository, book repository that extends what your JPA repository to be able to interact with what, with your database, with our in-memory database. Okay, so you have that in. From that, you have a service that does the business logic. So which is what we say, basically it's a basic service that does only 4 functionalities, which is list all or find all books in your catalog, save a new book, update an existing book, and a delete of an existing book. Okay, so just basic code application and the main class. So again, this project doesn't have anything yet, so now we will be doing, it's now just double checking the configuration. Okay, as you can see, or we can take this one off or not even mind it yet, because I'll explain when we are migrating this project to a GraphQL. Okay, so that's how it is. It's this part. So we just does the database communication, database configuration. As you can see, we are defining the application name, specifying the source, which is the database itself, the database driver, and the username, which is that, and the password, and empty password. Of course, we have to allow Spring Boot to be able to auto update our Hibernate environment, and also specify the platform. Okay, so once we have all of that in, so for example, now if I were to run this application, currently it's a REST-based project. Oh, I forgot to show you the controller. Okay, currently it's a REST-based project. As you can see, it's just using what, a REST controller, which will be removing all of that completely. So let's just set it up. Okay, so now, okay, while it is starting up, okay, it is doing that. Okay, so now it is started. As you can see, Tomcat started at port 88. So again, folks, now if we can just do a quick test before we migrate to this project, you come in your Postman, okay, and then maybe let's just do a one REST. Okay, let's just use this query. So we are adding this book, which is what name. As you can see, the endpoint, it goes to add book API, books and books, so meaning it is coming to this controller, which is the add book, which is what you are seeing here. So it is coming to this REST controller. So again, let's do a quick test of it just to show you that it runs fine. Let's attempt to add a book. Okay, there you go. So book has been successfully added. Fine. Let's try to read this book. As you can see now, that if in REST you require multiple endpoints to handle the same data structure, which is sometimes it's a tedious work, because of, if for instance your application might contain about 200 endpoints, you'd have all of these endpoints defined, so it becomes too much to manage those. So again, let's use now the get book, which is to see if we can list the book that we just added. So let's run that, a get endpoint. Okay, as you can see, source code is 200, and this is our book. We has been successfully added. As you can see, the ID is 1 because of we recently added this new book. So now the book is successfully added. Okay, however, we are not interested in all of this. This is the important part now, is to migrate this project to GraphQL service. Okay, so now while it's that, I will stop it again. Okay, of course now it has lost all the book that we created, since it uses an in-memory database. Okay, so folks, what I will do now, let's go ahead and translate this project to GraphQL. Okay, so what we require now, it's a folder called GraphQL that will contain GraphQL resolvers. So if we do GraphQL, we create GraphQL folder. Okay, and then we won't care about this bit, about this controller. We're not going to look at that. However, the service, we will be still using the same logic in the service. Yes, we're not going to change the service, and the repository, they will still be the same. Same goes with the entity, they will still be the same. The only thing that will be changing, it's the controllers, because of now it's not using REST anymore, it will be using GraphQL. So again, from here, let's just double check our configuration. So first things first, it's going to the POM file, which is double checking your dependencies. As you can see, these are all both our dependencies, which is that we require for GraphQL. So we have that, which is the first one, the Spring Boot starting GraphQL. You have that, and you have the Spring GraphQL test for testing. Again, once you add all of this, of course, you might have to reload Maven if you have not reloaded them. So you have that, which is fine. Good, we have that, and then we can close this. So from here, we require now properties to tell Spring Boot that now we are using GraphQL. So which are the same, those are the properties I was referring to. Again, I was meant to remove them so you can see when we are editing them again. So we can edit these properties again. I'm just going to copy them back, so you don't get confused where we derived to get this. Okay, so again, we have that in. So what it means here, we are defining this is the location where the GraphQL query will be, what we'll be doing next, and this is the path to our GraphQL endpoint, which is enabled by default in Spring Boot. So you have that in, that's fine. Now we are done with properties. So what we need now is to define what the schema for GraphQL. So if we go to resources again, we create a new folder or a new directory called GraphQL. We have that in here, GraphQL, and from here you will do a schema.graphql. So now we create a file called what is schema.graphql. Schema.graphql, we have that schema, which is what we'll be defining. Okay, as you can see, it's a GraphQL file. So we have a schema that like that. Okay, let me just close this. Okay, so now this means that the schema that we'll be creating has to be mapped back to our entity, because of this entity has to rely to this, or this schema has to rely to this entity, because when we are defining the data model. It means the data model has to be compatible to what GraphQL knows, which is the schema that we are creating now. So as I said, our book model contains what? It contains what? A class called a book that have what? A book type as well. So again, we're having that, which is a ID, a name, ISBN, published date, and a price, and a book type. So which is either a soft copy, hardcover, or an ebook. Okay, so that's what we need to be defining now, so GraphQL can be able to understand that. So let's go ahead, folks, and do defining this. Okay, I have a schema here already in my tab that I would like us to use, which is the what we will require. So now again, I will explain how this is. Okay, so let's look at this schema. So this schema, as you can see now, we have first of all the type book, which is what represents the book in a catalog. Basically, it's a full book that contains what? An ID, is a name, ISBN number, and a published date, and a price, and a book type that defines either it's a soft book or an ebook or a hardcover. Okay, so which is now, this is basically the same as this class. It represents this whole book class. That's what it means. So again, now we need to define now our queries that we'll be sending to GraphQL, which is now our CRUD operations. Okay, so this is how we were to define those now. So we again, as I said, this book, it takes what? A book type of a book type. You know, that has three options, either a hardcover, softcover, a book. So again, GraphQL will expect that too. Hence, we are mapping a book type to a book type of this book type. So hence, we are defining that. So again, support the types of books. This is how we are defining those. Moving on, now we need to define our queries. As I said again, GraphQL uses query resolve, uses two mechanisms to do its own queries, which is the first one, a type of query, and a type mutation. So as I said, a type query only does two operations. Well, basically, it does one operation, either to read something only. For example, if you are getting a book, all of the books, or you are getting a book by an ID, or either you want to filter by something else, maybe a book name, but again, it has to be defined in your logic. So which is now what we have for the type query. It's only, we don't really need this one because our controller or our resolver won't have, our query resolver won't have this functionality to what? To read a book by an ID, but it's fine, we can leave it there for now. But the only functionality that we have for our query resolver, it's the get all books, meaning to read all books. Yes. Okay, so moving on, let's look at now at the type mutation. So as I said, type mutation would refer to if you want to add a new book, you want to update an existing book, or you want to delete an existing book. Those are only the functionalities for type mutation. So again, to add a new book, we require what? The name, ISBN, published date, price, a book type of a book, right? Moving on, same goes to updating an existing book. Again, by an ID, you do what? It requires an ID, a name, ISBN, published date, price, and the floating the book type of a book. So same goes to lastly, which is now the delete operation that will require a delete by an ID, which is if it exists, it's gonna be a boolean type because of it could be true or a false. But of course, you wouldn't want to delete a book that you don't even see or that you don't even have. You would rather delete what a book that you know. However, for being safer, it's important to have it as a boolean of a type, so that whenever it's false, it can return false. If you don't have an existing book, but if it's true, you have a book to delete, then to return true. Okay, so folks, now that we have all of that in defining our query, so now we need now to create what? Our resolvers, which is our queries. more like a controller in REST, but now since it's no longer REST, it's a GraphQL, so it's gonna be what resolvers. We will be calling it as resolvers. Okay, so I'm just gonna also close this. So let's now look at the first resolver that we'll be creating. So our configuration is fine. We have defined the properties correct, and we have defined the schema fine, and we have added our dependencies fine. So now we just need now our queries, which is now the same queries that are mapped to the existing what repository and service and model. Okay, so now let's have that, which is the first query that I have here. It's what a book resolver, a book query resolver. Okay, let me just copy it in here. So let's go ahead. As I said, we will be using to avoid conflicting with REST. So I'll be using what this GraphQL directory or package. So let's create now a query, a book query resolver. We define that. Okay, I already have some snippets, so I'm just gonna copy from those. Okay, so however I will explain it. So let's just paste that in here. Of course, same package, we need to remove what. Okay, so folks, this is what we have for a book query resolver. This means now, as I said, query resolver would mean to read something, right? You want to read something only, or you want to filter by something, right? So of course, this is how it would look like for us now. So again, it's still the same as pretty much similar to what it would look like if it was REST. But now again, as you can see now, it's no longer at a REST controller because this is not a REST API, but a GraphQL API. Hence, we are calling it at controller now, not at a REST controller. Okay? Once we have that, again, you define your book service, which is what already we have in there. What I showed you already earlier, like this is just the normal structure of a book service that connects to the repository and does the JPA queries for us. Okay, so again, basic constructor, you are defining constructor, private final, book service, and then you do that. Okay, probably here, once you have that in, which create a default argumented constructor that take what a book service of a and a parameter of a book service and assigns that to there. So again, here, as now we have only one functionality. So again, as I said earlier on, that we don't have the functionality to do what, to filter by an ID, but of course we can create that, but we don't really need it to filter by an ID. So we only have this operation to get all books for our type query, so which is also mapped to our book query resolver. So now let's look at our book query resolver again. So we have our query mapping, which is a get books, which is this function that is mapped with this operation in GraphQL schema. So again, we have that type query that does this operation, which is the got all books, and again, which is mapped with what, with this book query resolver. So again, we only have one functionality here, which is the get books. Again, we don't have the second one, so we can get rid or we can create it. But of course, if we were to create it, it was going to look like something like this at query mapping. So again, we have that in, let's say, public public void public but anyway, not really matters, but of course it's because we'll have to define it here too, and we'll probably need to create it to the service because the service doesn't have that functionality, which is to find the book by. So by night is something that was going to be like public string or public book, it's the public because public book find by ID, so something like this. Public book find by ID, that take what, a long ID of a book, and it goes there, and then I would say now repository dot find by, as you can see, dot find by ID of what, of a book, so something like this, and then you add a semicolon. So of course this functionality, we needed it to be here first, so then we can be able to call it this side now. So again, if we say now public book, which is now find by ID, that takes what, a long ID, and opens it up and do what again, which returns a book service dot, there we go, which is now the new functionality that we created, find by ID, which is ID. Yes, so that is how it would look like, and to make it work with this side. So of course okay, but of course folks, we don't really need this operation, because now it would mean that from here again on the book service. But anyway, let's just get rid of, because we don't really need to filter by an ID. Same goes with this side. I'm just gonna take it off again. Now you have the existing functionality. So now we are done with the book query resolver. So now we can begin to doing what, to doing now a book mutation resolver. So here we create a new file called book mutation resolver, which is now that book mutation resolver. Okay, let's get the snippet for that. So book mutation resolver. Okay, I'm just gonna copy it as full, and then we'll look at the code together. Okay, I'll just take this off. I'll remove this. Remove that. Okay, have it in clean. Okay, this is how it looks like now, folks, which is now the book mutation resolver. So again, book mutation resolver, it's doing three functionalities, which is to create a new resource, to update an existing resource, or to delete again a resource from the server. So it only responsible for those operations. So again, I'll explain the code. So let's go ahead and look at the code. So now that we have that in, so let's also look at the code again. So again, it's using what, the existing service, which is existing service. So from this service, now what it does, it initializes that in, create an instance of the book service, and then it auto wires, which is now a constructor. Again, we might have to do that in here to auto wire, because of doing a dependency injection is not safe. So it's important to do a constructor level instead of doing a field injection directly from the field. So let's have that in here. So now we create our constructor, which is accumulate constructor that takes what, a parameter of a book service and an instance of the book service, which does that again. So now we are defining now our functionalities, which is now our three operation, which is to add a new book, update an existing book, or delete a book. Okay, so now, as I said, it's mutation now, not what, not a query mapping. It's a mutation mapping, not a query mapping, because we are not listing something or filtering something, rather than we are adding, creating, or removing something. Okay, So folks, we have all of that in. So now the first code, the first functionality that we have, which is the add book, it takes what? In a parameter of a name, ISBN as well, those arguments, publish date, price, book type, which is already what we've discussed. Creates a book instance, calls the builder pattern, which is the builder functionality from Lombok, to build this new book that we are creating. And then after that, calls the book service to save the book instance, which is all of the parameters that you see. Okay, same goes with the update method. So this update functionality, it does what? Again, it updates a new book based on the ID, name, type, ISBN number, publish date, price, book type, and it builds the updated book and update the book using the service. Okay, same goes now with the last one. So this one, since we just want to remove, so it just calls the book service function to remove, and remove based on the inputted ID. Okay, and it turns through if it's true. Okay, so now folks, that we are ready to test, we should be good to go. Everything is successfully mapped. So as I said, we can remove this as well because we don't really need this functionality because it's not the case for this time. Okay, so okay, once we have that in here, now we can begin to run the project, which is what we'll be looking at now. As you can see, we only have one endpoint, which is the GraphQL endpoint. So how you define a GraphQL endpoint? It's through by a configuration, well, by this property. So this is what it means. Spring.graphql.path, this is where it will be available. So at port 8080, it should be GraphQL for us to be able to interact with it. Okay, let's start it up, folks. As I said, now we no longer care about the controller, but the REST controller side of the representation. We only care about GraphQL representation. So let's start now the project, folks, and test again using GraphQL now. I will start it. So normally at the bottom, it throws some logs when adding GraphQL. Shows information to tell us that the GraphQL has been added and some important information. So let's quickly review it. Okay, it's starting up. Okay. Okay, that is running. Let's look at it. Okay, it is started successfully. It should also show GraphQL information, but that's fine. We'll look at that. Let's see if we didn't miss up anything. Okay, GraphQL, that's fine. And that's fine. Okay, that looks fine. Okay, that's fine. We will do a test now. Okay, so let's first run one query just to try to edit the book. Okay, this is how it would look like GraphQL queries. So first of all, if you are doing, as you can see, port 8080 GraphQL, that's the endpoint for GraphQL to do all of these CRUD queries or CRUD operations. So let's try to send one query now to see what we'll be getting. Okay, let's go ahead. Probably a naming convention that we missed. Okay, let's go ahead and look at that in. Okay, probably it needed to be S. Let's just refactor. Put S as well. GraphQL. Okay, that's the schema. Okay, let's define it like this. Let's stop it and start it up again. Okay, so now if we are starting, okay, give it a second for it to start. There we go. As you can see, now it is successfully configured, auto-configured GraphQL. As you can see, folks, now we are getting GraphQL, so we should be able now to run our GraphQL queries. So if you look at that, there it goes, even the endpoint for GraphQL. So everything now seems fine. So first of all, what we will be running, it's the query, which is, again, let's send this query again just to see the difference this time. Of course, what I'm expecting in my case is not to get any information, but at least a 200 status code to show that the endpoint is available. Okay, let's send it the query. Good, there we go. So now it means our database is empty, so we need to begin adding information. As you can see, the status code, it's 200. So now let's look at one of the queries that I prepared for GraphQL. So I have 4 queries that I've already prepared. Let's first start looking at this one, which is to add a new book. Let's go to our Postman. So as I said, in GraphQL, you only use one endpoint, unlike REST, whereby if you have about 50 operations in your application, you have to define all of those endpoints for each operation. So in GraphQL, we just simply use one way, or maybe let me just do that and paste it. Okay, let's copy it again. So if we copy this query again, let's go paste it to Postman. So now it's doing what? A mutation, right? It means we are adding something, a mutation resolver, not a query resolver. Mutation resolver. So we're adding a book of a name, HTML clean code, ISBN number, there is the number, publish date, there is the publish date, price, there is the price, book type, a hardcover. Okay, and we are returning what? An ID. So if this part means if this book is added successfully, then return it and give us an ID and the name and the ISBN number. Maybe what we can also ask, we can ask all of these fields to be populated back to us as soon as our book has been added. So instead of only returning back, so instead of only, instead of only returning what? An ID in the book and ID in the name, so let's return all of those and a book type. So now let's send this query to GraphQL. Folks, as you can see, our book, which is our book 1, ID 1, has successfully been added. This is how now we can add information to our book catalog. We can add new books. So let's add another one. Say instance this one, instead of clean HTML clean code, we'll give it Java clean code or Java programming. Probably Java programming will do. Java programming. Okay, change little digits in the ISBN, publish it file, maybe the pricing, we can just put it on 4. Book type, soft cover, let's put it on soft cover. Okay, now let's send this second query, folks, and create a second book. Okay, as you can see, book ID 2 has been created successfully, fine as well. I can think these are enough. So now once we can get this book created, so one thing we need to do now, we need to list all of them back, meaning we need to do what? We need to run our get all query, which is now this one, before we can update and delete those books. So let's copy this query, folks, and go ahead to our Postman and attempt to read our existing books, or the books we just created. Okay, So now we have it means now get all books, so return what an ID, a name, ISBN, publish date, price, book type, of course our fields. So let's say this, meaning now folks we should be seeing 2 books, right? Okay, let's send. Perfecto. Okay, there we go. They are being returned successfully, folks. As you can see, both the books we created are successfully being returned using GraphQL. Okay, so now one thing we can attempt to do, probably to do an update or a delete. Maybe let's first do an update query. Okay, so now if I copy this one to do an update, so we will update ID book 1. So again, so let's say we wanted to update book ID 1 instead of being a hardcover, let's make it a soft cover. So let's copy it, let's paste this query. So now mutation query or mutation resolver, it means now what you need to do is to use this function to update this book ID 1 and using this name, replacing it with this name, probably the information as well, ISBN as well, we have changed it, a published date, and the price is that. On book number 1, we are updating that index book number 1 with the new book, which is updated, that is this name and this new information, and it is a soft cover. So again, instead of returning that ID and the name, probably let's also return both of these fields, maybe all of these fields, ISBN, published date, price, book type, just book type. Okay, so now let's give us the updated information of the new book. Okay, as you can see folks, book number 1 has been updated with this new name, updated book, price, and book type. So again, if we were to now use our get all query, which is the query we had previously to get all our books, so let's say if now I wanted to return all our books again, we should see this updated book. So let's send the query. Okay, as you can see now our books have changed. So book number 1 is using the new information that we just updated. Okay, so which means even the update functionality works, folks. So now let's go ahead and do a last operation, which is the delete book by an ID. So of course, what we need to delete, let's say we want to delete book ID 1. So of course, we are calling that methodology or that function, which is the delete book by an ID, and then we are specifying the ID number, which is that we want to delete. So of course, let's say we want to get rid of ID number 1. So let's send that. So if now we are sending this query, as you can see, deleted book, it's true, it means the book has successfully been deleted. Let's go and confirm that using what? The get all query. So now we should see 1 book being returned to us since we recently deleted this new book. Okay, so let's send that query in. Awesome folks, as you can see, we are getting back 1 book, which is with the ID 2. Okay folks, I think that's all. We completed everything we needed for this demo. If you have any questions in the comments that you want to throw, please folks send them to my DM or just comment. I will answer your questions, all of them. Also, if you like this video, please like and share and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much folks. Before that, let me finalize now the best practices for doing that. So as you can see, all of our operations folks are working successfully fine. So what I will just do now, I will stop my web server. So stopping it and finalize our slides. So of course we can just now look at the best practices for doing this. Of course this thing gets a bit complex if you are not using details, which is what now we're not using. So just to keep in mind, it's important to, when using GraphQL, to use details instead of entities, which is in this case we're using entities. So a detail would mean you have a book input that contains all the book variables, unlike what we did now to have a book and a book type. So a book would have all of those in detail. But of course, that's a best practice that you will take for going production with this solution or with GraphQL. Also keep clean schema, which is very important, to have a very clean schema that won't confuse you or give you some hassles. Okay, add the pagination and the error handling. Very important to add an error handling and a pagination when using GraphQL. And again, looking at the real world use cases. Of course, this is very important for a social media feed and analytic dashboard, e-commerce product, APIs, mobile applications, as it provides an easy way of exchanging of the data without having to have so many endpoints in your application that will be able to maintain and manage. Okay, folks, I think we can end here. Folks. If you like this video, please share and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you have some questions, please drop them. I will answer those. Folks, thank you so much for attending. See you next time. Peace.